So I'm going to do just a general welcome to everybody and then hand over to Melanie Salter from Boom. I'm Claire Fincham, Marketing Manager of SAPICS. SAPICS is an association for individuals and organizations working in the supply chain management space on the African continent. We educate, empower, and elevate people, and we do that through our membership, our events, our annual conference, and our education program. We also have affiliates, and one of the affiliates we have, affiliate association, is Boom, which Melanie is the CEO, and I love working with her, and we've done some good work together, and we wanted to put together this webinar to discuss women in supply chain, as in South Africa, it's Women's Month in August. So we are celebrating women in supply chain and men in supply chain who support women in supply chain. And it's great to have such an overwhelming response to this event. And we will be sharing some slides with you, as well as the link on YouTube post the event. And we'll be taking some questions. Melanie will talk to that, and you can put those questions in the Q&A box on this Zoom webinar. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. Thank you very much to the amazing speakers. Thank you to the support teams of Julia and Bronwyn and Connor for helping us put this together. And over to you, Melanie. Enjoy the afternoon.
Thanks so much, Claire. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been working with SAPICS on and off since 2011. I worked, and I think it was the first time I went to a SAPICS conference in Johannesburg. So it's an absolute pleasure to be invited by Claire to do this webinar. And she said, so let me introduce myself. My name's Melanie Salter. As Claire said, I'm the CEO of Boom. Boom is a global community for women in supply chain. We have over 1,000 members in 70 countries around the world. Our mission is to empower and support women in supply chain. I worked in supply chain for 25 years. I was very alone in a lot of the work I did, and my mission is I don't want anyone else to be that way. So we're here to support and inspire women. So for those of you who've come along to a Boom webinar, you probably know what I'm going to say, because I say the same thing every time, but it's true every time, which is, please, we love these to be as interactive as possible. I know we're here speaking, but we want to hear from you, the audience. So as we go through, if you've got any comments, put them in the chat. If you've got any questions, use the Q&A box, please. And just to kick things off, just to get the juices flowing, please say hello in the chat and where you're calling in from, because we've got people calling in from all around the world. So we'd love to hear from you. So someone be brave and put hello in the chat. That'd be great. So, hello, thank you who did. Oh, it's coming in. I love you all. You're great, best audience ever. So when Claire asked me, she said, let's do something for International Women's Month in South Africa in August. I was like, oh, okay, what should we do? What should we do? And I'm in this very privileged position. I've worked in supply chain for 20 odd years, and now I work for Boom. So I look at this really unusual intersect of supply chain and sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and HR, I suppose. And in the last few months, I've come across 3 different reports. And the first one, Gartner, I knew the Gartner Awesome reports come out every year for 10 years. And Himani, I don't want to cover too much of what you're going to talk about, but there's not a huge amount of data on the number of women in supply chain and where we sit in levels of seniority and what we're doing. But I knew about that one. And then I had the good fortune to come across VillageReach, which was amazing, and they've done some fantastic work, but again in women in supply chain, but with a very different spin on it, more around healthcare. Again, don't want to spoil. And then I was speaking to Claire, and she was telling me the work that Katrina and her colleagues had done for SAPICS, again on women in supply chain. And I read all these 3 reports, and I was just like, I read them all and I went, it's very different industries, very different sectors, whatever, different parts of the world. And I'm seeing the same stories. I'm seeing the same barriers. I'm seeing and the same recommendations. And I thought, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could get everybody together and just talk about that and talk about the 3 reports, because they're all fascinating and it's great to spotlight them as well. And then, you know, the real mission for us is to give you some key takeaways. We want actionable points. This is not just a like chit chat. This is, we want to change the world, And that's for all of us to do. And we're going to give you a huge amount of really great tips so that you can take away and make your supply chains more inclusive. So that's why we're here. I'd love to kick off. If I can just ask everyone to introduce themselves and then give us a brief background to your survey and who ran it and the respondents and all that. And Katrina, you're top of my screen. Can I ask you to start that, please?
Yes, sure. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katrina Tyson. I'm based in South Africa. I'm joining you today from Amsterdam. So I'm the co-lead at Proqurable. I've just started this new job, just been doing it for a few weeks. And for those of you not familiar, Proqurable is a startup with a mission to tackle medicine access gaps in low and middle income countries. So we do this by building partnerships across the supply chain, across sectors, connecting quality manufacturers with medicine providers and innovators to improve medicines access to the underserved. So we leverage the decades of procurement experience and trust from iPlus Solutions. They're an international NGO based here in the Netherlands. So we aggregate demand, coordinate sourcing, supply chain to tackle those persistent medicine access gaps. Most of you have read many things in the newspaper recently about the changing nature of development funding. So organizations like ours play an increasingly important role. I have also, like Mel, been working in supply chain for over 25 years. I've worked in large corporates, I've worked in consultancy firms, I've worked in NGOs, and now in a startup. I have 2 children. I've learned that there is no such thing as work-life balance. It is a constant juggling exercise, and I am incredibly grateful to my village, so my friends and my colleagues, for their support. I think I've noticed a big shift in perception in the post-COVID world, where my colleagues seem much more likely to voice family commitments, and I'm definitely less worried when my children interrupt some of my team calls. But today I am here representing some of the work I've been doing with the SAPICS organization. So in 2023, I had the privilege of working with SAPICS to host the Women in Supply Chain Leadership session at their annual conference. And as Mel said, we recognize that there isn't a huge amount of data on women in supply chain. There's even less data on women in supply chain in Africa. So we ran a survey, and that covered all SAPICS members and SAPICS conference attendees to look at some of the specific challenges that women in Africa were facing. So the SAPICS conference runs every year in June in South Africa. It's focused on supply chain leading practices. It's sector agnostic, so there's representatives from logistics, textiles, mining, health, tech. It is predominantly African-based businesses, but there's a growing representation from businesses that operate in Africa but are located outside Africa. We have now been running the Women in Supply Chain Leadership Survey for 3 years, and then annually they get presented at the conference, and we intersperse the results with stories from awesome women from across the network. And we do have 2 separate surveys based on the gender identity that people identify with, so that we can look at the different perspectives and compare and contrast how people see the workplace. In 2024, this session was standing room only at the conference, which was super exciting. So this year we actually got one of the big plenary halls, and we have great representation again. The survey looks at a few different things. So it looks at female representation at the most senior levels of the organization. It looks at people's perception of career advancement opportunities, whether or not people have experienced gender discrimination, the perspectives on male allyship, what initiatives organizations have implemented to focus on gender equity, mentorship coaching, perceived barriers, and salary transparency. And a bit later, I'll talk you through some of those insights and the different perceptions that we saw amongst people who identify as male and people who identify as female.
Thanks so much, Katrina. And I really love the focus that you have in yours in this, the different perspectives. It's really fascinating insights. Lanoi, you're next in my Screen,
Thank
can I
you.
ask you to tell us about your report, please?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. Really looking forward to engaging with you. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Lanoi Maloiy. I'm based at VillageReach. And for those who may not be familiar with VillageReach, our mission is to make primary healthcare responsive and accessible, especially to underreached communities. So in that vein, I was brought on board as a gender expert to roll out the gender strategy that had been worked on by colleagues in VillageReach. Part of that underreached communities, as you may well be aware, are women accessing that primary healthcare, women in very, very underreached communities not being able to access healthcare. So it's been interesting working on the strategy and on rolling out the strategy and understanding what are the core reasons for this. And part of that work has been looking at women in the public health supply chain. What are the real challenges for women working in this area? And part of gender is understanding what are the challenges that men, women, young women face in terms of the public health supply chain. And sometimes gender issues do occur in terms of maybe men, but in the case of our survey or the work that I'm going to be discussing, it's mostly young women. So just to talk a little bit more about the two pieces of work at hand. The first one was completed by colleagues Rebecca Alban and Mariam Samir and other colleagues. It was a way of understanding what are the challenges of the career pathways in the public health supply chain, and what are some of the social factors, the social norms or cultural beliefs maybe, which may be creating barriers for public health supply chain workers. So as part of this, a survey, an online survey was administered to 69 global stakeholders. So that was an online survey on SurveyMonkey. And then also as a follow-on to that, about 68 key informant interviews were taken across the DRC and Malawi, but also some global stakeholders to better engage with the stakeholders and understand what are the career pathways, what are maybe the soft challenges or the social norms, cultural perceptions that were facing the two countries, DRC and Malawi. We also just completed some kind of very similar work as well, which I was working with colleagues in DRC, which was a gender analysis as well of the public health supply chain under the name Next Generation Supply Chain in DRC. So this one specifically looked at DRC, and both cases did have gender analysis, which is a systematic examination of roles and behaviors of men and women in the country. So we used a particular framework, which was the JPIGO gender analysis framework, to help us to format our results and our questions, and also to do our analysis, both the understanding the imbalance in the gender supply chain in DRC and Malawi, as well as the more recent work we did last.
Okay. That's not just me, it has frozen, hasn't it?
Yeah, she's frozen.
All right, let's come back to Lanoi when her internet's back up and running. Gotta love it. Himani, so I've got to give a disclaimer. So Dana Stifler from Gartner had offered to come along. She'd agreed, and she was really excited about joining this event. And something came up at very last minute, and she's had to drop out. And Himani, who just got back from holiday yesterday, has agreed to step in and fill Dana's shoes. But Himani comes from a very strong supply chain, but also women in supply chain background. So I thought she was the perfect person to bring in.
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay, let's bring.
Yes, we just
had
a slight.
You.
Yes, sorry, just a slight fluctuation. I hope you haven't missed me too much.
A lot. We missed you.
Okay, so I was just saying about the gender analysis and how it helped us to structure both the work. For the one in DRC, we did more of we did a survey, but we also did focus group discussions to help us to understand these beliefs and perceptions. And we did focus groups separately for men and women to allow for very, for more organic conversations instead of having mixed methods. So we did it across 4 provinces in DRC, and we got very interesting results, which I'll just have a coming soon trailer because very soon I'll be talking about it in the later part of the webinar. So over to you, Melanie. Thank you for that. For the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's fascinating. And again, I love this. It's completely different perspective again, very much more focused into healthcare, and also with the bringing in the more social and cultural beliefs, which I think is a fascinating lens to put over it as well. So thank you for that. So Himani, as I've said, stepping in at the last minute, thank you so much. If you could tell us more about the Gartner Awesome Report, well, introduce yourself and the Gartner Awesome Report, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Melanie. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here. And, when Melanie wrote to me, I was like, okay, I think we can do this. So I'm absolutely excited, and it's great to, interact with Katrina, Lanoi, Claire, and of course, Melanie always. And of course, to hear from all of those people who have logged into the Zoom call. So my name is Himani, and I am based in Dubai. I have about 25 years of experience in supply chain. Most of my time has been spent in my home country in India, and last 6 years I've been in the Middle East. One of the things that really attracted me to this speaking opportunity was, the whole focus around Africa. And, there is so little that we really talk about some of these markets. Coming from Asia, being the only woman on the supply chain floor for first 15, 18 years of my work life. Except for the administration assistant who was there for the team. I was the only woman, having worked in a factory which didn't have a woman's washroom, to seeing all of these discussions today. It's come a long way, and it's so great to see, though there is so much progress yet to be made. But yes, my day job is as a consultant. I work for a supply chain niche consulting firm called Miebach Consulting. My day job also includes bringing up 2 kids. And, again, as Katrina was saying, there is no work-life balance. It just keeps changing every hour, every day. So we just do our best. And I'm excited to be here. I know Dana should have been here, but, she's not there, and I get this privilege. So I'm absolutely excited to share insights from the Gartner's supply chain survey. I have myself been a big follower of the Gartner survey for quite a few years, and it's an interesting opportunity for me to be able to fill in for Dana now, at this short notice. I think for me, a couple of things that really stand out about this survey are, first, this is, I think, one of the oldest running surveys in this space since 2016. So it's, 10 years data, which I think is absolutely great. It's always served an important and specific purpose, which is to help supply chain leaders benchmark and improve their ability to attract, develop, promote, and retain women in the supply chain workspace, which is what, we all want to kind of focus on as well. The 2025 edition was run between Feb and March this year, and we had about 161 respondents. Important for us to note that almost all of these are from organizations who are more than 100 million in revenue. And almost all of them have weighed towards North America or Western Europe. And I think there's no representation from Africa. There is only 9 respondents from Asia Pacific. Which means that most of the insights that I'll share with you today would be reflective of the trends that we are seeing in North America and European supply chains. But then these have usually been the bellwether supply chains or the trendsetters, which have eventually, flown down into markets like Africa and Asia. So I think it's an interesting and important thing. It doesn't represent the entire market, but it's a big signal for all of us to focus on. This year has been a bit different. and I think that's again an important piece for us to make a note of, is that some of the largest and most advanced multinational supply chains, including some of the Gartner top 25, have chosen not to participate in the survey. And the reason around that is uncertainty around US federal policy and regulatory enforcement, which has made them very cautious. This absence matters. Historically, these are the ones who've been pushing the envelope, opening new frontiers in diversity and inclusion, holding themselves accountable, and really setting the trends in this space. And without this data, this year's results tilts more towards smaller organizations, which are not as mature in the way they operate in their supply chain. And we have to keep that context in mind. And when we get a little bit more detail into the report, we will see that it doesn't represent as I said, a powerful signal. They tell us that the progress is stalling, where it is reversing, and then there are still some bright spots of momentum. So we look forward to interacting and sharing more on that with you going forward. Thank you, Melanie.
Thanks, Himani. And a lovely question's just popped up saying, how do we get Africa onto the Gartner map? And it's as simple as they just need to get in touch with Gartner and say, we want to respond. We want to take part in this, because there are companies in Africa with a revenue of greater than $100 million. So let's get those voices being heard, because it'll change things. It's just, we need to hear from every corner of the earth. I want that data coming from a data background. I really want to see it for the whole world, not just North America and Western Europe. That's what I love about the voices here. We've got loud voices from Africa in this discussion, as well as the North American and Western Europe. So I'd love to get, and I'm aware we're getting on with time because I knew there's just so much to cover, but if you can, each of you, and Lanoi, let's start with you, please, if I may. Can you give us a brief overview, tell us about the key themes and findings within it before we come on to the recommendations, because those will be the takeaways. So if you just keep to themes and findings, that'd be great.
Okay, so thank you for that, Melanie. So one of the key findings we got was on career pathways, because as Katrina alluded before, there's a huge gap in data. So one of the key findings was about career pathways, especially a gendered pathway, because further along the career line at high school and in tertiary or university, girls are shepherded into certain career paths. So this has a follow-on effect into terms of what career choices are available to them. So often they are kind of dissuaded from taking maths and science, which are natural progressions for public health supply chain careers. So we found that there was kind of a lack of awareness of what was required to get into the public health supply chain, with one area being that you get a qualification in public health supply chain, which is a very rare one. Most people would go into pharmacy, being pharmacists or other healthcare workers, and then get a qualification in health in the supply chain later on as on-the-job training. And so if you're not geared to taking maths and science as a young girl or a young woman, then you're kind of already locked out from this career path. But there were also softer areas like gendered norms or perceptions that the supply chain is a man's career. So often it also puts girls into, or young women into, a certain career path. And then, and this was also a bit apparent in our work for the gendered analysis in DRC. We started to notice there were certain perceptions or certain ideas that, well, the supply chain is man's work, and it was associated with physical labor, like lifting boxes, or, maybe being in the supply chain physically in terms of transport or whatever. And so it dissuaded a lot of women, or it was just seen as not a women-friendly career path. So this was one of the key outcomes there. And also just what we've talked about here, even us as panelists, the idea of work-life balance. That was a big finding in our gender analysis in DRC, that that perception that taking work home or having it conflicting with domestic responsibilities, and that being infringing on women's role as wife and mother, it became a challenge for retaining women in the workforce. So these were the key takeaways and thinkings around that. And we structured it, of course, now with our gender analysis framework. Also, apart from the perceptions, the idea that it had an effect on women's leadership or ability to get into management, because already if it's perceived that this is not a career for women, getting into management or leadership will even be more difficult. So this is something that perhaps when we come to talk about the recommendations that we could focus more on, because if there are these negative perceptions, it doesn't affect just the women as workers, but also in terms of getting into leadership, because often there's this idea, think leader, think man. So, it locks out women in that case. So I think those were the key recommendations, key findings from our work. I don't know if there's any questions, or we can take them maybe a bit later.
I'll just make a comment here, Lanoi, and when you
Yes.
said, I can tell you that when I started working and I would apply for a job in lots of, I was asked this question, how come you're a woman and you chose supply chain as a job? And I was like, the world's best chefs are all men, when cooking is supposed to be a woman's job. Isn't that traditionally how it's seen?
Yes.
And all the best chefs globally are men. And I would kind of use that to tell them that skills are not gender-based.
But there is some literature out there about these kind of gendered career paths. So they are what are perceived as pink careers, where those are the careers that young girls and young women are shepherded into. It's perfectly acceptable for women and girls to be in a career path for teaching, for nursing, marketing. Yes, those are the pink careers. Yes, but then now when you go into careers that are perceived as male careers, that's when you get a lot of resistance and often a lot of harassment. You'll find that in male-dominated careers, women really often suffer from, there's physical harassment, but also sexual-based violence, because part of it is the idea that we need to keep this a male-dominated zone. So we need to push out women. So there are those kind of areas. And in our DRC gender analysis, we're looking in terms of policies and feedback mechanisms for women to report harassment. And we found it was inconsistent across the different provinces. Some had very good feedback mechanisms, others did not. And it was also found that there was a stigma or some sort of ostracism. If you did report, some women reported losing their jobs for reporting this harassment. So we really need to think also about those kind of safe spaces, so that if you can report that harassment, then we can be able, there's mechanisms to protect you for further on. So
this has gone down a slightly more depressing route, but I'd say that's the same in Europe. I'm seeing that at the moment, young women in supply chain calling me up. I had 2 calling me up in 1 week about being sexually harassed by their boss, and they didn't want to go to HR because they knew they'd end up losing their job. So it makes me sad, but that's why we're here and why we're doing a job, and it's getting better. So let's just keep chipping away. I think what I find really interesting about your report, Lanoi, is it's about pipeline. It's about getting women initially into supply chain. So getting them into STEM and then actually making them see supply chain as a career choice. So thanks for that. So Katrina, coming on to you, if I may.
Yes, sure. So again, you mentioned there's a lot of commonality against the results, and a lot of what Lanoi said resonated with some of the findings we had from our survey, but I'll focus on a couple now. So the first one I want to talk about is perception. Perception varies hugely amongst the respondents who identified as male and female. And obviously perception becomes reality, and perception drives frustration. And this came across in a few different areas of the survey. So we asked respondents if they believe there are equal opportunities for advancement for men and women. And 89% of men said that they strongly agree, but only half of women strongly agreed. And perhaps more interestingly, 32% strongly disagreed that there were equal opportunities. So again, a varied perception. And we also asked whether or not people believed that salaries were equal across genders. 63% of men thought that salaries were largely equal, but only 25% of women thought they were the same, and more than half of women suspected that salaries were higher for men. And then the last area where perception came in was where we asked respondents to tell us what they thought some of the biggest challenges facing women leaders in supply chain were. And nearly half of the male respondents identified family commitments as a major barrier. But interestingly, only 10% of women identified this as a major challenge, and they had actually identified the biggest challenge being that there were limited opportunities and that supply chain is a male-dominated industry, which I think we heard just then from Lanoi. And why does this difference in perception become so important? Well, it tells us that men and women experience the workplace differently. And also, if the decision makers, which are still often predominantly men, and from our respondents, over 80% said the most senior person in their organization is still male, if they perceive the issue differently, it's much more harder to address some of the systemic barriers that women might face because resources are likely to be steered in the wrong direction. So when it comes to salaries, there's some things that organizations can consider, like having pay transparency. And this is another area where it's quite interesting to see the differences in responses, because 74% of the men that we surveyed said they thought their organizations had transparent pay policies, but only 26% of women said the same. So I'm not sure if they're just working in very different organizations. And then when we think about some of those barriers, again, if the people who are making the decisions and the people who are looking at what solutions are needed have a misplaced assumption of where the root cause of the issues are, then we're likely to be putting those resources into the wrong places. The second key theme I'd like to touch on in terms of the survey was the idea of male allyship. And this is one where we had really great alignment across all of the respondents. So 97% of all the respondents agreed that it's important. So male allyship, that's men actively and visibly advocating for gender equality, fairness, amplifying women's voices. And I think one of the things that it's important to highlight here is that when we're talking about gender equity, we're not talking about men versus women. And some of the research that you'll find in the slides that we share afterwards is that in more gender equal societies, men are healthier and happier as well. And many other respondents, in fact, nearly 100% of the respondents who are male actually shared examples of male allyship from their organization, which was really positive. And this included things like building greater gender awareness or actively working as a coach or mentor to women within their organization. And I think one other thing that's important to call out here is that that concept of gender bias isn't just for men. Women are just as likely to judge women negatively when they display leadership behaviors that do not align with societal norms that we attribute to women. And there's a really interesting case study in the slides we can share where one of the universities in the US actually just changed the name of the protagonist in a research study and looked at people's perceptions of the individual. So nothing had changed other than the name, and the perception was that this would be a great person to work with. He was very successful when the name was male, and that the perception when the name of the study was changed to a woman was that she seemed aggressive, self-promoting and power hungry, and they wouldn't want to work for her or with her. So I think many of us have to take a look inside in terms of our perception of strong women, and in particular, strong women of colour. And the last thing that I'll point out is, from the themes, is that 46% of the women who responded to our survey want to work with a coach or mentor, but they don't have one. And this comes across in other research, including from the Authority Gap Consultancy, that globally women are under-mentored and under-sponsored. And this is a really interesting area where SAPICS have actually stepped in and have some interesting solutions that can help with a matching service for mentoring, which we can talk a little bit about later.
Thanks so much, Katrina. And can I build on what you were talking about on the gender equality front, and it not just being in favour of women? There is a perception that if we allow more women into a business, into higher levels of seniority, that there is less opportunity for men. But the research shows that the greater the diversity, including gender, not, because we could talk intersectionality, there's so many different areas here, but the greater the diversity, the more successful the business. So it's not a zero-sum game. If women get more, men get less. It actually, so if you think of it as pie, because I like food, I always think of it like this. It's not that you get a smaller slice of the pie gets bigger, so everybody gets a bigger slice of the pie, and that's really important. And it's something I didn't know till I started working in Boom, which is like the business. I don't like calling it a business case. We should just do it because it's the right thing. But the business case for more inclusive environments is huge. Companies are so much more successful, they're more innovative, they make better decisions faster. Bottom line, they make more money. So why wouldn't you want to have more women in? And this is why we need to break down these barriers, these perceptions, and get more people in. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So before I start off on a rant, Himani, can I bring you in with the Gartner All Summer Report, please? Tell us about the findings and the themes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Melanie. I think we'll talk a little bit about 3 key takeaways that the Gartner report. I think the first and foremost is that we are seeing a representation decline overall. While, in an overall sense, the number of women has gone up by 1% between last year and this year, there is a sharp decline in the VP and CSCO level. Almost 50% of the pipeline has thinned down. Now, this is largely because of quite a few things, which includes baby boomers moving out, retiring. Last year was one of the largest number of American population that retired. There is also decline in the frontline participation, which means that we are not recruiting as many women either. And this is especially true so much more in the consumer and the retail supply chains rather than in the industrial supply chain. So, consumer and retail supply chains definitely bleeding much more. So what this means is that we are actually having a leaking pipeline from both ends. We are recruiting fewer women, and even fewer are making it to the top. And there is very little pipeline in the middle, because we know that middle management is the biggest loss of women, right? That's where maximum number of women actually leave organizations or supply chain or burnout and so on and so forth. So that's one of the key takeaways. So overall, there has been a decline after steady gains for many, many years. There's been a decline in 2025. The second takeaway is, of course, that there is an erosion of accountability, and we've seen that very clearly. The accountability has weakened across organizations. There's been a 13-point drop in supply chains holding themselves accountable for progress, and a 28-point increase in those admitting that they don't have any goals at all related to improving the representation of women in their supply chains. That means a large number of supply chains organizations are not really doing much about it. Either they are leaning on enterprise-wide D&I programs, or they're not doing anything at all. And they're not holding themselves accountable for that either. So that's I think not a great space to be in right now. There's no goal, there are very little ownership, and that is the reason why progress has been stalled, or in some specific cases, even reversed. Having given the not so good news, I think there are still some bright spots. and that is in pay equity and underrepresented talent. And again, this is, as I said earlier, in the context of United States. So most of it is North America and Western Europe, but there are bright spots, and there is representation from women from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups has increased at most levels, and pay equity is improving. So those are really, I think, great points. There is a 10-point rise in companies achieving pay equity, and many more have actually talked about time-bound action plans to show that, they are trying to take measurable steps, and that wherever you do actually, focus on measurable steps and objectives, you are seeing results. So yeah, I would say these are the three key takeaways for us in the from the Gartner report. There is, of course, a lot of data in terms of retention improvement, but overall it's not all good right now.
No, it's been, because I've been tracking them for years, and you can see the number of women going up. It's been going up slowly, but it's been going up, and then last year it flattened, and this year it's just gone up. And
That's really flattening, but this year has been a sharp decline, and I think the general expectation is that it would continue going forward as well. I believe
hopefully in about 3.5 years it'll pick up again. Fingers crossed. All right, so we've had these three really different perspectives. We've had Katrina just looking at people working in supply chain in Southern Africa and all the SAPICS people. We've got Himani representing sort of the Americas and a bit of Western Europe and very large corporations. And then Lanoi Maloiy in the DRC, looking at healthcare supply chain. So really different. And this is where the beauty of the overlap, or however you want to look at it, the recommendations. And these are the take recommendations from the reports, but also these things that all of us can act on. So we've got a lot of them, and you have overlap. So can I suggest that you get one each and we move round, and then you can jump in and add to it, and you can build on the other person's answer, because otherwise we're going to someone's going to say all your answers. So Katrina, let's start with you. What can people be doing? What do we need to be doing? No, you're on mute still.
First of all, I'd like to say that I feel like this group, Claire, Melanie and Himani, we need to set up a stronger relationship between the work we're doing at SAPICS and Gartner, so we can start to look at like a world view. I think that would be really interesting. And then I like to think about actions in terms of different levels. So first of all, I think that there are things we can all do as individuals. So I am one of the mentors, and I do it through the SAPICS program. So I see a few people on this call who are saying they would like to have a mentor. Please do let Claire or myself know. I'd be very happy to be a mentor for people who are interested in moving into leadership roles. I think that's something all of us can do. And on the other end, all of us can also make their needs, raise their needs, like ask for a mentor or a sponsor or a coach. The second thing I think in terms of organizations is that we need to make sure that we listen, and then we engage with women in our organizations and understand the barriers that they face, and then tackle some of those issues rather than making assumptions. So we talked about things like having salary transparency. That is a component. I think understanding in the specific industries what might be some of the blockers, and I think that is going to be different if you're in a manufacturing organization versus office type organizations. But again, there's some simple things that the organizations can do to tackle some of those challenges. And then I think that one of the things...
Can I stop you there, because I think you've covered a lot.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I think we can come in, because I mean, Himani, Lanoi, do you want to build on anything that she's touched on there? Because I know there's overlap. Lanoi, you're nodding, go for it.
Just to talk about those career pathways, because I think that's really important, especially creating that awareness and even working further back to go to secondary schools and tertiary institutions to sensitize or create awareness around the possible pathways other than the pink careers that I talked about for young girls and women to see it as a viable career path, but also thinking about the awareness around making it, with male-dominated workplaces, to look at gender awareness training for supervisors or male colleagues working in the supply chain to avoid this kind of feeling of uncomfortableness that women face in these spaces. And then the third one is about looking at these feedback policies or having gender responsive policies to avoid harassment. In our second work in DRC, that was really critical, having safe feedback mechanisms for women that are consistent across board. I think that will really encourage, because I saw in the questions there was a comment of women do well in the workplace. Yes, but in a male-dominated workplace, if you are there and you face harassment all the time, no matter how good you are at your job, you will your self-confidence will be eroded. So we need these kind of protective mechanisms for women to retain them in their spaces. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Melanie, if there was one thing that I have to add, and this is more from my personal experience and less from, the Gartner report. Of course, Gartner report talks a lot about quite a few things, but this is one thing that for me personally stands out, is really, really active sponsorship at workplace. And, I feel that a lot of times we get confused between mentoring and sponsoring. Especially for us women. I have been mentored a lot, haven't been sponsored as much as I would have wanted to be always, right? I felt I was a little bit over-mentored and less under-sponsored.
Himani, sorry, can I interrupt? Can you define the difference between the two things, just in case anyone is confused?
Yes. Right. So I think that's an important piece. Yeah, thanks, Mary. So mentoring is where you work with somebody who's more experienced than you in the area that you want to work on. It could be about a specific, let's say, skill that you want to work, or you want to basically you're gaining from someone else's experience to develop your own skills. Whereas sponsoring is where somebody actively talks about how good you are and makes sure that you are talked about in the rooms that you're not present for opportunities that you may not completely even be aware of, but that fit your career plan, that fit your ambitions, and that fit your skill set, and where you can really make a difference for yourself as well as for the organization.
Yeah, thank you.
I think a lot of times we need sponsorship. Sorry, Lanoi, please.
I was just going to add that sponsorship is I think it's important to have sponsorship also from same gender, because the way that you'll be sponsored or guided by a woman leader will be slightly different from a male leader. And so also from us in the African context, there are some cultural barriers sometimes when you're sponsored by a man. I think this is really something to think about. And then just also thinking about intersectionality. This is something to think about, because also thinking about the different intersecting identities you may, your young African woman, you need also that kind of mentorship from maybe an older African woman as well, to teach you about the different intersecting issues that you may face at the workplace that might not be faced by women from global north or elsewhere. Just as an addition to that. Thank you.
I absolutely agree. If I was to choose a mentor, I would choose a woman as a mentor, but if I have to choose a sponsor, I would go for a man.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. In fact, I've had my most successful sponsors have been men, and the whole point is they're in the rooms I'm not in because we're not in them enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the massive privilege I have in my role as Boom, is because I have access to people from all levels of seniority. I can act as that sponsor, and I've got to say, for people out there in that position, it's such a joyful thing to do. When you meet someone, you think, gosh, she's amazing, I've got to tell people about her. It is actually a really lovely feeling. And then you see these stars. Damn, I need to think of the name. Amazing woman that Claire and Jenny at SAPICS put me in touch with in Mozambique, whose name I'm sorry I've forgotten. And she put me in touch with her. If anyone can jump in with her name. And I interviewed her and I had her on call. And she's just amazing. And it's lovely to be able to do that.
I'm on a call. Sorry. Let me. Yes.
Okay.
I think it was
work-life balance coming in there.
It was Stella, I think, Melanie.
Stella, that's it. Stella Jakarta in yeah, in Mozambique. Absolutely amazing young woman, and it's lovely to be able to sponsor her and again spotlight her here. Thanks, Claire. So Himani, do you want to come in with some other key recommendations from the Gartner-Rawson report?
Yeah, sure. Now, I think from the Gartner report, I think one thing that I would kind of focus a bit more on is how do we address the top reasons that women leave, and I think that's an important one, right? While there is a lot of focus on recruitment, and that all of that is there. I think creating flexible workspaces, and I see that during COVID that really worked so well. All of us were shocked as to how well work can happen, and nothing falls apart even though all of us were working remotely for an extended period of time, and that changed so much for everyone. But this whole back to work push is again putting women, especially mothers, at a disadvantage. Especially young mothers. I think that's a big piece. So creating flexibility at workplace, eliminating bias in hiring and promotions, and I think that's once about the whole sponsorship piece, and we just talked about. So I'm not going to go around that. And the giving equitable access to career paths. I think these are the three areas where one would focus on. For these are the top reasons why women leave. We want to grow. We want to get more challenging assignments. We want to do different things. Just because we become mothers or just because we decide to take a step back at some point in time doesn't mean that's the story of our life for the rest of the years ahead. So there is a lot of opportunity out there, and we want to be considered for that. And I think that would be those would be the key areas that I would want to focus on.
Thanks so much. Katrina, do you want to build on any of that or add something new? Because I know you've got a lot.
No, I mean, I think there's a couple of things that resonate there with me. And one of the things I think that's come across from all of these themes is the importance of encouraging women to move into supply chain roles and not see it as a male-dominated industry. And one of the ways we can do that is actively engaging through schools and through education programs. Still at schools where they do have career fairs, there's still such a focus on that professionalization role. So doctors and lawyers and engineers, whereas supply chain gets less of a mention. And I think women are natural supply chain leaders. You look at and speak to any woman with children who is navigating the multitude of WhatsApp groups and extramurals and different finishing times and different locations and transports. It's like women do this so wonderfully well every day. And any women that have career breaks in their CV that they're worried about, just talk about the experience that you've got in supply chain. So I think just seeing if there are opportunities to engage, go represent at your local school, go talk at fairs about supply chain, encourage more women to see this as an area they can move into.
That's such a good point, because they don't, it's, as you say, it's not there. And I went and volunteered at my son's school, and I had a little stall, and I said to the student, so do you want to learn about supply chain? And they just went, no. Kept walking. Just, not all of them, but one did. That just made me laugh. Sorry, Lanoi.
I was thinking that, just following on to what Katrina said, perhaps working with women-focused organizations to work with them with what Katrina said in terms of creating that awareness, and also that natural sponsorship or mentorship to be partnered with a woman. She may not be in the same supply chain, but facing the same things that women are likely to face, that work-life balance. How do you negotiate even for your salary? No, but I mean, in school, they never teach you. How do you negotiate your first salary? How do you say, this kind of work that I'm doing, I need maybe a little bit of a raise? Men have these kind of networks already that they are taught all these things. But for us as women, perhaps it's not something natural. So working maybe with women-focused organizations to help with these kind of things. And as Katrina said, going back to secondary schools and the tertiary. And I also mentioned that in terms of the career paths. And I think even when we think about it, looking for more areas for research or more of these surveys, especially I feel like about intersectionality. Because even when we think about women, when we think about gender, it's not everybody will have the same experience in the supply chain. And how can we pull that out so that we have a fit to purpose recommendation? So for me, this is something we need to think about. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Lanoi.
Thank
That's
you.
such an important point, bringing in the intersectionality, because I'm aware that I've experienced discrimination, but it won't be as much as, say, a woman of colour. So yeah, we've got to allow for that. Something I talk about a lot, and which you touch on there, is you say men are better at networking than us, but I say that all women have a great support system usually. You'll have especially once you've got kids, because you're going to go under otherwise. You know, and you've got all the people, I call it a constellation of support, and it's actually a proper psychological term that you have that's coined for women with children. And I have a brilliant support system for my personal life, but I don't in my professional life. And this is something I really encourage, because it's essentially that network you're talking about. So where is your network of support? And I would ask everybody on this call to think about that. Is it in place? Who could you call? Who did you used to work with who is lovely, but you've lost touch with? Put all of those people in place, because when you have a question, one person doesn't fit all the, can't answer all your questions, but if you've got a stable or this constellation of stars around you that you can call on, it's amazingly powerful, because there are your mentors, your sponsors, the people to ask for advice when you need salary, or God forbid you're being sexually harassed at work. There are people to call on, and you're not alone. And that's again where SAPICS and Boom, we're here for you. Reach out, because that's really one of the things that we're here for. Himani, do you want to add anything in? I know oh gosh, we're almost at time. Himani, do you want? Okay, hang a sec. We've got 3 minutes. Each of you, if there's one key takeaway that you want people, I love it putting you on the spot. One key takeaway, each of you, that you want people to go and act on. What would it be, Himani? Because you've jumped in enough already today. What's one more, right?
Find your sponsors, and not sponsor, but sponsors. I think that
Nice.
would be the single most important thing for me to focus on. Find your build your sponsors as you go along, build your sponsors, and that's your network.
How do you do that, though?
To you when you're not in the room. Build your sponsors.
How do you find sponsors, though? How do you spot them?
It's it takes time, and you have to be very mindful about each one of these, and it's more about giving a lot and making sure that you are adding value to the business, and that it is being seen, and that there are people who understand what you bring to the table, where you're not focusing on what you get, but rather what you give.
Okay, so it's sitting down with key people and telling them about what you're doing. So don't hope that they're going to notice the amazing work you're doing.
What can you do for them? I think that's how it all starts, right? Where do they see you fit in the larger scheme of things, the puzzle that they have in their mind? I think sponsors are usually senior leaders. They have a certain agenda, and how do you fit in that agenda and make sure that you're moving their agenda forward is the important piece.
Okay.
And that's where they would bring you on, because they're focused on bringing their agenda on.
Okay, so they see you as a help. So how can you help? And that gets you on their radar.
How you can help them get what they really want, and
Really?
you get yours in the bargain.
That's a great bit of advice. Thank you, Himani. Katrina, what's the one
So
thing?
if one thing, I would say that I'm sure that the majority of people attending this call probably are people who identify as female. And one of the most disappointing things that we see from some of the survey results is sometimes women discriminated by other women. So be the sponsor, be the mentor, be the advocate, and actively look for ways to challenge the organisation that you're in and to lift up other women, give them a voice in the room where they're not, give them a seat at the table when you can. So as a woman, don't just think about the challenges you face yourself, but the role you can play in actually making some of the steps forward easier for other women who come after you.
And that's true for the men on this call as well.
Great point, Katrina. Great. Thank you so much for picking that up.
Lanoi?
Okay, I think the key thing to take away is that gender does matter in the supply chain, and that we really should not think of it as a male-dominated job. And anything that we have talked about, the mentorship, the thinking about the career pathways is really, really important. When we look at supply chain, we should give a lot more opportunities for us to speak about the gendered issues, because part of solving it is identifying what the issues are and then addressing them in various formats or channels that we've talked about. And I think there's just a question in the chat that I've thought about where somebody's saying, I'm just graduated, I want to enter into this profession, and how do I do that? I think it's going back to your lecturers or the people at the uni and asking, could you introduce me, and being mentored by them so that they can speak your name in those places. So thank you so much. I really appreciate and really enjoyed. Time has flown. Thank you.
It has. We could keep going for another hour, couldn't we? It's just like, I know that we've got more that we could talk about, but I just want to say a huge thank you to all three speakers, Lanoi, Katrina, Himani. It's been a fantastic session. And I think for me, a massive takeaway is it doesn't matter where you are in the world, the challenges that women face are incredibly similar. There's the amount of overlap, and therefore these recommendations that we've given is true whether you're in, I've seen we've got people South Africa, Nigeria, US, Europe, just it's true for all of us. So let's help one another, and by helping, by creating a more inclusive culture, it helps everyone, so everyone wins. So thank you so much, Claire, for organising this. And actually, while I've got some Boom people, we've got an event on the 18th of September on running your supply chain running your finances like a supply chain. Sorry, Maddie.
Cool.
It is very cool. Thanks, Claire.
We have lots of different comments and things like that. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but we may see if we can try and email answers to you as well. And as I said earlier, we will share the recording and the results of the various surveys. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.
Everyone,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye, 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 bye.